Go.
Good morning, everybody. So, the topic of my speech today is going to be prostitution, as made apparent behind me. I took a survey of everybody, and not surprisingly, everybody pretty much agreed that prostitution should be kept the way it is, where it's illegal. I'm going to start off by giving you a couple facts about prostitution, and then I'm going to go on to explain a little more detail of what exactly the benefits and the pros and cons of legalizing versus keeping it currently illegal. The word prostitution brings many pictures and words to people's minds, and the debate between legalizing prostitution and criminalizing it has raged on for years. It's going to give you a few facts. 80% of women in prostitution are raped frequently. According to Susan K. Hunter during a speech at the National Coalition Against Sexual Assault in D.C., that's a very high rate of women in this business that are taken advantage of, and because it's illegal, they can't just walk into the police station and claim rape because, what are you going to say? Hey, I'm a prostitute, I was raped. Most women who sell themselves transmit HIV and STDs at a much higher rate than women who do not. This is mostly due, according to my research, to the fact that they don't have access to quality health care. They can't exactly get health insurance for being a prostitute. The last statistic I'm going to give you is 7 to 39% of all men worldwide buy sex from women at one point in time in their life. So part of my survey was how many of you have actually paid for or thought about paying for sex sometime in your life, and the vast majority of you said, no, I would not. According to statistics, that's not true. So, all right, so now that I've explained to you a few details about prostitution and the current status of them, I'm going to give you a few ideas about the need for it. Men are highly sexual beings. It's a well-known fact amongst people today that men think about sex a lot. Sex for men is physical. A guy can look at a woman and if he finds her attractive, can pretty much not have a problem with having sex with her. Women, on the other hand, are more primarily emotional, while some women can have sex with men without being emotionally attached. For the most part, women have the emotional aspect. Sex and physical domination are actually ingrained in the man's psyche. Men from a very young age are actually encouraged to be more dominant, to be, I guess you would say, overbearing. But and women, on the other hand, are typically more submissive, even though today that's kind of changing, thankfully. According to Melissa Farley, Julie Bindel, in 2009, they did a study on how men need sex. Well, there isn't a man alive that wouldn't admit that he does not need sex. So she did a little survey, and she found that 32% of men have sex to satisfy an immediate sexual urge. 21% of them seek variety and want to select certain physical, racial, and sexual stereotypes, and so on and so forth. And this is the top reasons why men hire prostitutes. Look at yourself, for example. Would you turn down sex from a perfect person? When I say perfect person, a lot of you can put in a head. You can imagine in your head the ideal person. Sometimes you might think of celebrities, you might think of movie stars, even musicians. Would you honestly turn down sex from that person if you could have the opportunity to and not have any kind of qualms or have any kind of repercussions? It's another reason why men, or actually even people, hire out for prostitution. It's because you can actually pick what you want, what kind, what color, what type, what kind of role, and you don't have to have any of the long-term effects of a relationship. Someone very wise said, you don't pay a prostitute for sex, you pay her to leave. Now, whether I agree with that or not, it's a very common scenario. The next point I'm going to make is women crave security. The reason why a lot of women get into prostitution is because they like the financial aspects that it provides. Provides a good amount of money for a lot of women. In the current wave of independence and self-sufficientness aside for women, the women typically look for a provider or protector. Women, ladies, if you look at two guys, one is weak or not a strong guy, and then you look at the guy on the right, and he's a very strong, self-secure gentleman, who would you pick? Would you pick the weaker guy? More times than not, you would actually pick the stronger guy. Next point I'm going to make, sex is like money. You can get by without it, but it makes life so much easier and fulfilling with it. Money and sex are almost interchangeable. If you have money, you're probably going to have lots of sex. Typically, if you don't have money, you're not going to have as much as if you did. So, how do we fix this? Well, you can look at legalized prostitution. Countries where it's legal, they actually suffer from a lot less crimes. According to Liberator.net, I have a couple graphs here. This shows that countries that have legalized prostitution, their crime rates are vastly lower than countries that do have prostitution where it's illegal. Canada being the top, Denmark, France, Greece, even ironically enough, Iran. Although in Iran, you as a female get caught as a prostitute will typically get stoned, and the guy will get away with it. So it's not exactly the best example, but as far as crime stats, it definitely goes to show that crime is lower in countries where prostitution is legal. All right, so the next point I'm going to make is healthcare. Regarding the sex industry, or regarding regulating the industry means sex workers are monitored and by proxy the clients they serve. Going back to one of my points that I made, that the rate of HIV and STDs and other sexually transmitted diseases are much higher when prostitution is illegal because, like I said, women and prostitutes for that matter don't have access to the health care that you would if it were legalized. Allowing it to remain invisible only perpetuates the disease cycle. Using a management-based containment model rather than a prohibitionist ignoring one. When I mentioned prohibition, I don't know how many of you actually do history, but once upon a time it was illegal to have alcohol in the United States, much less to produce it. The government decided it was too much of a problem, it caused too many issues, and mostly it was a moral aspect. What happened was everybody decided, and I know here in North Carolina and a few of the southern states, moonshine was a very big deal. I actually have some family members on my wife's side that make moonshine on a yearly basis. And what prohibition did pretty much said, look, you can't have alcohol, you can't make it, and it's done. Well, it created a giant black market for the product. So one could actually argue that when you tell a kid that you can't have a cookie, what's he going to want? He's going to want the cookie. He's going to go around every way he can to get that cookie. So just because you tell him no, it doesn't mean he's not going to get it. So the social conditions that we can look at next, if you look at each of these countries again, based on the amount of the money they spend on education and such, is actually much higher for the countries that have legalized prostitution. And for me, I believe that education is key. The more you know, the better you are. The conclusion of these facts is that countries with legalized prostitution enjoy many benefits that the U.S. does not. It has the lowest number of murders and rapes, lower number of HIV and AIDS deaths and STDs than the U.S., and it has a lower suicide and divorce rate than the U.S. In each of these countries, the U.S. has higher numbers, which is a very bad thing. An example I'm going to give you of a scenario, I guess you could say, of where someone might want to hire a prostitute is you can take Stephen. Stephen has been married for 20 years. No sex between him and his wife. Things have waned. It's not as pretty and fun as they were when they got married. So he has two options. He can either meet somebody at a bar and risk a messy divorce when it inevitably comes out, or hire it and be done with it. Look, people are going to do it. You're not going to stop it. So what kind of actions can we take? Well, on one hand, we have huge penalties for prostitution. But regardless, it will and does happen. As with prohibition, it has been proven that forced abstinence only makes problems worse. You cannot stop it. A few steps that we can take to fix this is you can decriminalize prostitution. Save the money via jail costs. 70% of all women in jail are there for prostitution or prostitution-related charge. There are reasons why. Other reasons are self-defense murders. They're there for petty crimes such as passing bad checks. But the vast majority of women in jail today, in prison today, are there for prostitution. The next thing we can do is you can treat it like any other vice, i.e. alcohol or tobacco, tax it and regulate it. Especially with the current budget crisis and all the political things going on concerning that today. Do you know how much money the states could make by legalizing and regulating prostitution? In closing, I hope I have convinced you to take a second look at prostitution and the problems of it being criminal, and lastly, the benefits of decriminalizing. Thank you for your time.